hadn't been out of the city in years. My life was all noise and lights and the constant rush of traffic, so the drive out to my friend Daniel's ranch already felt like a step into another world. By the time the road turned to dirt beneath my tires and the horizon opened wide with golden fields, I almost forgot why I'd come. Daniel had invited me a dozen times over the years. "You've got to see where I grew up," he'd say whenever we'd meet up after class or talk on the phone. "It's nothing fancy, but it's home." And finally, after months of dodging, I said yes. I told myself it would be a simple weekend. A little fresh air, catching up with him, maybe riding a horse or two. But when I pulled up that afternoon, Daniel wasn't there. His mom answered the door with the same kind of warmth he always had, smiling as though she'd known me forever. She explained he'd gone into town to pick up supplies and wouldn't be back until later. That's when I saw him. Out by the barn, a man was hauling hay bales like they weighed nothing. He wore worn-in jeans and boots coated with dust, and the brim of his hat shaded his face. But when he looked up, I saw the lines of a man who had lived under sun and sky for decades. His eyes were sharp, a gray blue that seemed to notice more than you wanted them to. He walked over, slow and steady, every movement deliberate. "You must be Adam," he said, voice low and rough around the edges. I nodded. "Yeah. And you're?" "Eli," he answered, offering his hand. "Daniel's uncle." His grip was strong, the kind of handshake that said more than words. And in that small exchange I felt something, not quite recognition but something that tugged at me. We didn't talk much after that. His words were simple, pointing out where the fence needed mending, handing me tools when I offered to help. But in the quiet, I kept noticing it, the way he'd glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not quick glances, not embarrassed. No, he held his gaze long enough to make me feel like he was searching for something. By the time Daniel finally drove up, laughing at how his uncle had already put me to work, I was covered in dust and sweat. But what lingered wasn't the work, it was those looks. Dinner that night was loud, filled with Daniel's stories and his mom's questions about city life. Eli sat at the end of the table, mostly silent, answering when spoken to but never offering much. Still, every so often I caught him watching me. Not in an obvious way but in that quiet, steady way that made my pulse jump. Later, when everyone settled in for the night, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air smelled like hay and earth, and the crickets sang loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Or at least they almost did. Because he was there too. Leaning against the railing, beer in hand, hat tipped back just enough for me to see the tired lines around his eyes. He glanced at me once, then held out another bottle. "Couldn't sleep?" I shook my head. "Too quiet." He chuckled softly, the sound more breath than laugh. "You get used to it." We stood there side by side, shoulders brushing once, twice. Neither of us moved away. The silence stretched, not empty but full, like something waiting to happen. When I finally turned to head back inside, I felt his eyes follow me. Not just a glance, not just polite. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't going to be just another weekend with a friend. Something unspoken had already begun. The house felt smaller once the sun went down. Maybe it was the creak of the old wood floors or the way the shadows stretched across the hall, but it seemed like the kind of place where voices carried. Daniel and I were supposed to share his old bedroom, and when we got there, I realized only one bed was made up. "Sorry, man," Daniel said, tossing his bag on the floor. "Guess Mom forgot. You don't mind bunking, do you? Just like the dorms." I forced a grin. "It's fine. I've dealt with worse." And it was fine mostly. Except the bed sagged toward the middle, and I was too aware of the space, or lack of it, between us. Daniel fell asleep instantly like he always did, but I lay awake, listening to the faint sound of coyotes in the distance and the tick of the ceiling fan. Around midnight, I heard the back door close downstairs. Curiosity got the better of me. Careful not to wake Daniel, I slipped out of bed, padded down the stairs, and found a faint light in the kitchen. Eli was there. He hadn't changed out of his jeans and boots, though his shirt was unbuttoned halfway, sweat-stained from the day's work. He was pouring himself a glass of water, his movements slow, deliberate. "You're up late," he said without turning. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. He nodded, set the glass down, and looked at me. "Too quiet out here for you city boys." I smiled faintly, though my chest felt tight. "Guess so." For a moment we just stood there, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Then he motioned toward the back door. "Come on. Air's better outside anyway." We stepped onto the porch, the night stretching wide and endless around us. The stars seemed brighter than anything I'd ever seen, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt on black velvet. I shivered, the cool air cutting through my thin t-shirt. Before I could say anything, Eli shrugged off his denim jacket and held it out. "You'll freeze otherwise." I hesitated, looking at the jacket, then at him. Something about the gesture felt intimate, more than politeness. But I took it anyway, sliding it on. It hung heavy on my shoulders, the sleeves a little too long. The fabric was rough, smelling faintly of smoke and leather and something that was just him. When I looked back up, his eyes were on me. He didn't look away. We sat on the steps, side by side. Our shoulders brushed once, then again, until they stayed that way. Neither of us shifted. My heart thudded so loud I swore he could hear it. He took a sip from his water, his profile outlined against the glow from the kitchen. "Daniel told me you work in design." "That right?" "Yeah. Mostly small projects. Office spaces, apartments. Nothing special." He hummed, thoughtful. "It's work that matters. People live in those spaces. They remember how it felt." I blinked at him, surprised. I wasn't used to people treating my job like it meant anything. I wanted to ask how he knew that, but the words stuck. Instead, I studied him in the dark, the lines around his eyes, the way his hands rested loosely on his knees, the way his chest rose and fell steady against the night. He looked strong, yes, but also tired. As if he carried more than just the weight of fences and bales of hay. When he turned his head, his face came close to mine. Too close. His eyes searched mine, lingering there. I could feel his breath, faint and warm in the night air. I froze, not daring to move. My whole body was waiting for something I couldn't name. But he leaned back a moment later, slow, as if nothing had happened. His gaze drifted up to the stars again. Still, the air between us didn't feel the same. It pulsed with something unspoken, undeniable. We stayed like that for a while, side by side, shoulders touching, sharing the silence. When I finally slipped back upstairs to Daniel's room, I lay in bed wide awake, the denim jacket still clinging to me with its weight and warmth. And I couldn't stop thinking, whatever that was, it was too close to be nothing. The next morning, everything should have felt ordinary again. Daniel was up before me, whistling in the kitchen as he fried bacon. He seemed perfectly at home, perfectly normal, and I tried to match his energy, tried to shake off the restless weight of the night before. But I couldn't. The jacket still hung in the corner of the room, draped over a chair where I'd left it. I caught myself staring at it while brushing my teeth, as if it meant more than a piece of denim ever should. I kept remembering the way it smelled, the way Eli's eyes lingered on me while I wore it, as though the jacket itself had carried some part of him into me. Daniel had plans to take me riding that day. We saddled up 2 horses, his dog bounding alongside as we crossed the fields. The air was sharp with the smell of grass and dust. I should have been soaking in the beauty of it, but instead my mind drifted, back to the porch, to the weight of silence, to the brush of his shoulder against mine. I didn't see Eli much that morning. He kept to the barn, working with the animals, the occasional clink of tools echoing through the open doors. Every time we passed within sight of him, I caught myself watching too long, and every time I thought maybe he was watching back. That evening after dinner, I wandered into the barn. I told myself it was curiosity, that I just wanted to see the horses, but that wasn't the whole truth. He was there, of course. He always seemed to be. He stood beside one of the stalls, brushing down a chestnut mare, his movements steady, deliberate. The horse leaned into him like it trusted him completely. "Hey," I said quietly. He looked up, gave a small nod, then turned back to the mare. "You ride much?" "Not really," I admitted. "Daniel's been teaching me." A pause. "He's a good teacher. Patient." The only sounds were the rhythm of the brush, the gentle shifting of the horse, the creak of wood. I leaned against the stall door, arms folded, trying not to stare at the way his hands moved, rough, scarred, but so careful, as if every stroke mattered. Without meaning to, I asked, "You ever get lonely out here?" He didn't answer right away. He slowed the brush, resting his hand on the mare's neck. Finally he said, "Sometimes. But sometimes quiet's what a man needs." His voice was low, thoughtful, and it hit me in a place I wasn't ready for. I wanted to ask more. Why he stayed, if he'd ever wanted something else, if he'd ever lost something out here that he didn't talk about. But I stayed quiet too. The silence grew thick between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, almost alive. Like the quiet held all the words we weren't ready to say. I stepped closer. I didn't think about it, my body just moved. Close enough to smell the faint traces of hay and leather on his shirt, close enough to hear the slow, steady sound of his breathing. He didn't shift away. He just stood there, still as stone, but his hand stilled on the horse's neck. For a long, suspended moment we didn't move. We didn't speak. And yet something passed between us, not through words, But through that silence, thick with everything we couldn't bring ourselves to name, my chest felt tight, my hands restless at my sides. Part of me wanted to reach out, to bridge that last inch of space. But before I could, I stepped back. My own fear got the better of me. His eyes followed me as I turned toward the barn doors. There was no accusation there, no frustration. Just a steady gaze that seemed to say he'd understood exactly what had happened. I walked back toward the house with the night pressing cool against my skin, my heart thudding too fast. I'd gone into that barn looking for answers. Instead I found silence. And somehow that silence told me more than words ever could. It was the third night when things shifted again. Daniel had gone into town to meet up with some old friends. He asked if I wanted to come, but I begged off, saying I was tired. The truth was, I didn't want the noise, the bar, the forced small talk. I wanted the quiet of the ranch. Or maybe I wanted something else entirely. By the time the sun slipped down behind the hills, the house had fallen into that familiar hush. Eli was on the porch as always, a beer bottle resting against his palm, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. I stepped out and he tilted his head in greeting. "Daniel leave you behind?" I smiled faintly. "Guess so." He nodded toward the empty chair beside him. I sat, the old wood groaning beneath my weight, and for a while neither of us said a thing. The night was cool, the crickets loud, the air thick with the smell of hay and dust. Finally he spoke. "City's a hard place to breathe. Out here it's the opposite, sometimes too much air." I turned to look at him. His face was lit faintly by the porch light, every line cut deep by sun and years, but his eyes were steady. "Which do you prefer?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Depends what you're running from." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't know what I was running from, maybe myself, maybe questions I hadn't let myself ask. I swallowed, looked away. We drifted into easier talk after that. He asked about my work, my family, the kind of things people usually ask to fill silence. But with him it didn't feel like filler. It felt intentional. Like he wasn't asking to pass time. He was asking because he wanted to know. At one point, I laughed at something small he said, a dry remark about Daniel's lack of subtlety, and in that moment his hand lifted, resting briefly on my arm. It should have been nothing. Just a touch. But it lingered. His thumb brushed lightly against the fabric of my sleeve, almost absent-minded, almost like he didn't realize he was doing it. But I felt every second of it. The warmth of his palm burned through the cotton, and my whole body seemed to tune itself to that single point of contact. I froze. I didn't look at him. I was too afraid of what I'd see if I did, or what I wouldn't. After a long moment he pulled his hand back. Slow. Careful. But the echo of it stayed, humming through me like the aftershock of lightning. Neither of us acknowledged it. He took a slow sip of his beer and I forced myself to breathe evenly, though my pulse was still racing. The sound of tires crunching on gravel saved us from whatever might have come next. Daniel's truck pulled up the drive, headlights sweeping across the porch. I shot up from the chair too fast, nearly knocking it over. "Guess that's him," I muttered, my voice too sharp, too strained. Eli just nodded, his eyes unreadable. When Daniel bounded up the steps a minute later, laughing about something one of his buddies had said, I plastered on a smile and went along with it. I didn't dare glance back at Eli, though I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. That night, lying in the too small bed beside Daniel's easy, dreamless breathing, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. The rough warmth of his hand, the way his thumb had traced the faintest line over my sleeve, the careful way he pulled back. I told myself it might have meant nothing. A casual touch, an accident. But deep down I knew better. It wasn't the kind of touch that disappeared once it was gone. It was the kind of touch that stayed. I spent the next morning trying to avoid him. It wasn't intentional at first. Daniel had me helping in the garden, carrying tools, and then we drove into town for supplies. But all the while, in the back of my mind, I knew I was stalling. I knew I was keeping my distance. Because the truth was, I didn't know what to do with the memory of his hand on my arm. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened. It wasn't just the touch itself. It was the way he'd done it so easily, as if he didn't have to question it. As if it was natural. But avoidance doesn't last long on a ranch. By afternoon, Daniel had disappeared off somewhere, and I found myself wandering back to the barn. I told myself I was looking for him, but deep down I knew who I'd find instead. He was there, of course. He always seemed to be, like the barn was an extension of him. This time he wasn't working. He was just leaning against a stall, arms crossed, eyes following the slow sway of dust in the air. When he saw me he didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. I swallowed hard, stepping inside. "Need a hand with anything?" "Not today." His voice was quiet but not cold. He pushed away from the stall and faced me fully. "You've been avoiding me." The words cut straight through me. I opened my mouth, then shut it again, fumbling for something that wouldn't sound like a lie. I don't know what you mean." His jaw tightened, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger. Something closer to hurt. He took a step closer. "You feel it too, don't you?" My breath caught. The barn was silent except for the restless shifting of a horse nearby, the creak of wood. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it filled the space between us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He searched my face, steady and unflinching. "Because it doesn't feel like nothing." The words landed heavy, final. And in them was everything I'd been trying not to admit. I looked away, throat tight. My voice cracked when I whispered, "No. It doesn't." The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty. It was alive, humming. Somehow, without thinking, we both moved at once. A small step, a breath, until the space between us closed. He leaned down just slightly and I leaned up and our foreheads brushed. Not a kiss. Just that. A soft, hesitant press of skin against skin, the quietest kind of surrender. I closed my eyes, the world falling away until it was only the warmth of him, the steady sound of his breath, the roughness of his calloused hand hovering close to mine but not touching. In that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of what was happening. I was afraid of what it meant. Because if this was real, if this thing between us wasn't just in my head, then nothing about my life would look the same. And yet, standing there with him, with that small point of contact holding more weight than words ever could, I thought, what if that's not a bad thing? When we finally pulled back, neither of us spoke. His eyes searched mine one last time as if he were trying to memorize what he saw there. Then he stepped away, slow and careful, like he was giving me space to breathe. I turned toward the barn door, my pulse still thundering, and in the quiet I realized, we hadn't confessed anything, not out loud. But the truth was there, hanging between us like dust in the light. And no silence in the world could hide it anymore. The days that followed blurred together, each one colored by the quiet understanding that something had shifted. We didn't name it, didn't dare to. But it was there, woven into the smallest moments. When he showed me how to tie a proper knot, his hand lingered over mine, his calloused fingers guiding each twist of the rope. When he saddled a horse, he stood close enough that his shoulder brushed mine, casual but deliberate. Even at dinner, with Daniel laughing loud and his mom chattering, I could feel Eli's eyes flicker toward me, quick but heavy with meaning. It was strange how natural it became. As if we'd both silently agreed not to press, not to explain. Just to exist in that fragile space where a look or a touch said more than words could. One night, I found myself awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. The moonlight spilled silver across the wooden floor, and something restless tugged at me. I padded down the stairs and into the kitchen, thinking maybe I'd pour a glass of water. He was already there. Sitting at the small table, a lamp glowing dim beside him, an open book resting in front of him. He glanced up when I entered, and his lips curved into the faintest smile. "Trouble sleeping?" I nodded, sliding into the chair across from him. "Too much quiet." He chuckled softly. "Told you you'd get used to it." For a while we just sat like that, the lamp humming faintly, the house wrapped in silence. He closed the book and leaned back, his eyes never leaving me. "What's it like?" he asked suddenly. "What's what like?" "Living in the city. The pace of it. The noise." I thought for a moment. Sometimes it feels like it keeps you from thinking too hard. There's always something to distract you. But other times, it's lonely even with all those people around. He nodded slowly like he understood too well. His gaze softened. Loneliness isn't about how many people are near. It's about who notices you. The words hit deep, though he said them so simply. I stared at him, and in that moment, I wondered if he knew how much he'd already noticed about me. We stayed like that for a long time, not needing to fill the air with anything more. When I finally stood to leave, he reached out instinctively, fingers closing gently around my wrist. I froze. The warmth of his hand anchored me in place. He didn't pull me closer. He didn't say anything. Just held on, steady until I looked down at him. And then, slowly, he rose from his chair. He leaned in, not hurried, not hesitant, just sure. His lips didn't find mine. Instead, he pressed the softest kiss against my temple. It was nothing really. Just a brush of lips against skin. But it undid me. Because I realized in that instant that I'd been waiting for a moment like this without even knowing it. Waiting for someone to see me in the quiet, to touch me without demand, to make something as simple as a kiss to the temple feel sacred. My chest ached with the weight of it, and when he let go, when he stepped back, I had to blink fast to hide the heat in my eyes. Neither of us said goodnight. We didn't need to. I walked back up the stairs, the faint trace of his lips lingering on my skin like a secret no one else could touch. And lying there in the dark, I thought about how strange it was that sometimes the thing you've been waiting for your whole life doesn't arrive with fanfare or declarations. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of an old cowboy pressing the softest kiss against your temple. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The morning I was supposed to leave came too soon. I woke to the low rumble of Daniel clattering around in the kitchen, his voice drifting through the thin walls as he teased his mom about her coffee being too strong. For a moment, I lay there in the small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, pretending it was just another morning, that nothing had changed. But it had. Every night, every silence, every glance had rearranged me in ways I didn't fully understand yet. I couldn't go back to the version of myself who had driven down that dirt road a few days ago, thinking this trip would be nothing more than nostalgia with a college friend. I packed slowly, folding my clothes like each shirt weighed more than it should. The denim jacket, his jacket, still hung over the chair. I touched it once, then forced myself to leave it there. It wasn't mine. Not really. When I stepped into the hallway, I didn't go to the kitchen. My feet carried me toward the back of the house, to the room Daniel had once told me was his uncle's study. The door was half open, and I could see him sitting there, framed by the soft light of morning. He wasn't reading or writing, just staring out the window at the pasture like he was trying to memorize it. Or maybe trying to let it go. I hesitated in the doorway. I should be heading out soon. He turned, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he stood, slow and steady, as though he'd been expecting me. "Long drive ahead," he said. "Yeah." My voice was rougher than I meant it to be. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The sounds of the house filled the silence, Daniel laughing, the clatter of dishes, the creak of floorboards, but in that little room, the world felt narrowed to just the two of us. Finally, he crossed the space between us. He didn't rush. He didn't fumble. He just laid a hand on my shoulder, solid and warm, his thumb brushing once against the fabric. His eyes softened, and I could see something there, something he'd never spoken out loud. "I don't know what this is, Adam," he said quietly, "but I'm glad it happened." The lump in my throat made it hard to breathe. I covered his hand with mine, gripping it as though I could anchor the moment in place. Me too. We didn't kiss. We didn't embrace. We just stood there, the morning light spilling over us, holding on to something that didn't need a name to feel real. After a while he let go. I walked out, my chest aching, and finished loading my bag into the truck. Daniel clapped me on the back, grinning. "Next time you're staying longer. We'll get you riding like a pro." I laughed, trying to keep it light. "We'll see." As I slid behind the wheel, I glanced toward the porch. He was there, leaning against the railing like always. No smile, no wave. Just watching me. The same steady way he had the first day I arrived, like he was seeing more than I wanted him to. The truck rattled down the dirt drive, dust curling up in the mirror. I kept glancing back until the house was a blur in the distance. And then I looked forward, the road stretching wide and endless before me. The silence in the cab felt different now. Not empty. Not lonely. Just full of everything I couldn't put into words. I didn't know what would come next, if I'd see him again, if we'd ever speak of it, if what we'd found in those quiet moments could survive outside the ranch. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that it happened at all. That I'd been noticed, seen, held in ways I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Whatever this became, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't undo it for anything. As the miles stretched ahead, I whispered it to myself like a promise, letting it settle into my chest, steady and unshakable. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But it found me anyway. And under the weight of that truth, the road didn't feel so lonely.